everyone, and welcome to another Zoom into Books presentation here on Facebook and Zoom. Today we are talking with Headline Books author Don Stansberry, who writes in all different genres. He writes novels, he writes middle grade, and he writes picture books. So welcome, Don. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on this stormy Friday morning.
It is definitely a storm. See, a perfect time to watch a book presentation. It's raining outside.
And then choose a book to read.
Exactly. Perfect weather for it. So today we are going to be focusing on Don's middle grade fiction. He writes middle grade medieval fiction, and he has two books in this series. The first one is Inky and the Missing Gold, and the second is Inky Ogilby and the Witches. So before we get started with some questions, Don, could you give us an overview of this series? Just a little bit about what it's about, where the inspiration came from?
Sure. Well, when my children were little, I have two daughters, they were both little, I would tell them stories. I coached high school basketball, coached for a lot of years. I missed a lot of their bedtimes. So what I would do is when I was home, I would tell them a story before they went to bed. When I wasn't home, I would write these stories down sometimes so they could have it the next night, or I could read it to them, or whatever it was, so they had it. But I found, because we were really good in my first part of my coaching career, and then the second part of my coaching career, we were just kind of mediocre. So I went through years of not sleeping through a night. If you know anything about high school sports, it's just not a seasonal sport. You train off season, you have conditioning, you have summer leagues. So it's a year-round thing. So I didn't sleep for years. And I found that as soon as I started writing these stories down, I was able to sleep through the night. And I think it's because I could control every single thing in the story. In a game or in practice or whatever, I couldn't control really if somebody made a dumb pass or was in the wrong defense or didn't run the offense right. But in these stories, I could control everything. So I think that gave me kind of a sense of control, and it allowed me to finish my basketball career and start this writing career. So the stories with the kids started out mostly with Inky, which is a character. It's medieval, but it's not the real heavy medieval things like Lord of the Rings or anything like that. This is a light, funny, kids version of a story of a kid whose father gets a curse put on him. And this kid's father is a Knights Templar, and he's carrying this treasure to the Americas. But the curse that's on the father says that his child will only age 1 year out of every 10, and he'll shrink to the size of 12 inches. So he's really about 60 years old. He looks 60 years old, but he's actually 600 years old, and he's very small. So that's how the story starts.
That's excellent. You know, they say that writing is very therapeutic, so you have certainly proven that in this.
It took away a lot of my narcosis.
Yes. And before we move on, we should give you some props here that you retired with 4 state championships.
Yeah, well, we had some really good players at the beginning. We had good players all the way along, but we had really big concentrations of good players and good combinations of players through my first 10 years.
Excellent. Yes, it's definitely a team effort. Before we begin in talking about specifically about these books, let's talk a little bit about how you began your publishing journey. So can you tell us about how you met your publisher?
Sure. I think we've talked a little bit before. I teach 4th grade, so I come in contact with tons of kids' books. Some of them are so good. They're among my favorite books of all time, adult or children's. But, and then some of them are just kind of mediocre, and some of them I thought, well, you know, I might be able to do better than that. So that's how I started. I was encouraged by some other teachers. I had these ideas, so I kind of put them all together in a book. Thought that was, you know, maybe good enough to show somebody. So I joined the West Virginia Writers Association, and they have a conference every year. And I attended the conferences several years. But one year there was a publisher down there, Kathy Teets, from Headline Books, Went to her presentation, was very impressed by her and her family and what they do and the whole Headline Books group. And she made a mistake by letting me have her number. So I gave her my stuff, and then I just bugged her. I called her like every couple weeks saying, did you look? What can I do? What do you think? And we just kind of built a relationship from me just completely bothering her. I guess it would almost be like a stalking situation now. But and that's what it took for me to get her to look at my book, even though she looks at, I'm sure, hundreds of submissions a month. But she remembered me from the conference, and then we just went from there. And then, you know, there's a lot of editing, a lot of back and forth, and a lot of whatever needs to be done to make it something that's, you know, sellable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Everybody has a different story about how they break into publishing, so it's always interesting to hear
Well, and then I had some bad situations too. I mean, I did one of those internet things with the thing, and it was one of the happiest days when they said, yeah, we'll do this, and all you got to do is this and this. And then afterward, which being really kind of dumb, I looked them up, and they said, yeah, this is the biggest scam on the internet. And they had people's dogs publishing books. So,
yeah.
You know, luckily at that time, one of my players was, her mother was a prosecuting attorney. And she wrote a letter for me and got me out of the contract.
Oh, excellent. I mean, you really do have to watch those. You know, you hear, you know, anybody can be an author when, you know, you go through, you know, those channels, which in, you know, some cases it's great, but then you have, you know, like self-publishing certainly has its advantages, but then there are a lot, you know, you have to kind of dig through the weeds to find the good ones.
Yeah,
So.
and plus a lot of the time, just fair warning, a lot of those people end up with a ton of books in their garage.
Yeah.
And no avenues to sell them.
Yeah, that's why, you know, going the traditional publishing route where you have a team behind you really plays in your favor, like at Headline Books.
And there's another thing at Headline Books, you know, with the bigger companies, I've heard stories where, you know, you don't get a book out for 2 years, but, you know, you can call your agent or your publisher and never get a response. With Headline, you know, you can basically call her, well, I did. You can basically call her all the time. I know she'd love to hear that, so don't call her unless you have something really good.
Oh, I'm sure she always loves talking to you. Yeah, it's nice because in the, you know, the publishing industry, there's a fit for everyone, you know, regardless of, you know, what you write. You can, you know, self-publishing route, independent route, you know, major houses, there's a fit for everybody's book. So anybody out there who's, you know, struggling with this process, definitely don't give up, because your book will fit somewhere for sure.
Yeah, there's an old greeting card that says, no matter how weird and strange you are, there's somebody out there that'll love you for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't want everybody to love you. If there's, you know, somebody out there who doesn't disagree with you, then, well, that's not very interesting. Yeah. So you have to, you know, do something that will spark discussions. So speaking of discussions, I know that you do a lot of presentations and like school visits and everything with your books. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, again, through Headline Books, things are organized at, especially if there's Title I money or LSIC money that they need to use up during the year. They will have authors come in, and I've really been pleased to do that. It's fun to go into classrooms and see kids that, you know, you're not responsible for all day long, but just go in and just try to get them excited about writing, do a little bit of writing with them. With the smaller kids and even some of the bigger kids, they love the illustration part of it. So to just go in and draw pictures, I know there was the school that we went to in Virginia, I would have a kid come up and I would not let him look at what I was drawing, but I would draw behind him and say I was going to draw a caricature of them, but then I would actually do Beavis and Butthead or some of those other characters, and the class would laugh. That kid wouldn't know what was going on, and it was just fun, you know, doing that kind of thing.
Oh, that's great. Anything you can do to get kids involved, you know, with writing or illustrating at a young age is such a great program, because especially, you know, in places like West Virginia, you know, you have to know that there's a huge world out there, and, you know, to be able to bring in stuff like that to the schools is fantastic. There needs to be more of that for sure, because you teach out of West Virginia. So it's always nice to have, authors and illustrators come in and, meet the kids firsthand. It's great.
Yeah, it is. And for something like that, for me, Jerry West was the biggest influence because there is somebody that's very good from West Virginia that, we just don't see that. We're good people, but we just don't have that kind of Hollywood kind of status. And he was the first one for me that did. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and West Virginia is a state of readers. And, like the West Virginia Book Festival is extremely well attended and people look forward to it, and the used book sale that they do there, it's always jam packed. So it's definitely a great state to get involved with.
Okay, so I kind of ducked your question a little bit about Inky and the Missing Gold, because I think you asked about that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Inky is, he's a small kind of guy. He's very smart. He knows all the magic. He's not really a wizard, but people think he is. He's kind of a rock star of his generation. People all want him to solve their problems. All the kingdoms want him. So he goes into hiding for about 100 years. And as these kings grow up or they die, his legend continues to grow. So the legends that the kings in present time read about as children, they look at him like that now, that, he's this legendary character that nobody can find. So that's where the first book starts, where they're trying to find him and solve the problem of the missing gold.
Excellent. And so since this is a series, can you talk a little bit about the process of writing a series? Because sometimes it can be intimidating, and then sometimes, you just have ideas for like 5 or 6 books. But I have heard of the sophomore slump where, you get a little bit stuck on your second book. So did you experience that, or how was your process with the series?
I really didn't on this one, because as I was writing it, there's several different characters that I really liked. And I thought, boy, we could branch off on those and create whole storylines from that. And I think it would be as good as the original. Sometimes when you look at that, you think, well, it's just a sequel and the original idea isn't that great. I mean, it was great, but then when you think of something else to go along with it, it kind of dilutes it. And I thought that in this, it even made the second book was better, but it made the first book stronger because of the things that started in the first book.
Right. So could somebody read the second book without prior knowledge of the first book?
Yeah, because I explained little blips here and there of what happened before. And once you understand Inky and Ogilvy's relationship, then you can kind of go anywhere from that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So this genre, the middle grade genre, is definitely in demand, especially for books for boys. So whenever, have you noticed that in the market, like when you go to schools and everything, do you get a lot of compliments and stuff on it? Because, Harry Potter is out there, and when you first think of books for boys, that's what you think about. So how do the kids react to what you write?
I tried to do this with boys in mind. I mean, it's not really gender specific, but I did in the first book, there's the Royal Zoo, and it's got a bunch of very strange animals in it that sometimes get out. They sometimes have to go through the zoo. You don't find out how they got there until the second book. But, I tried to create nothing really terribly scary, but just creepy things that you wouldn't see. Snakes with fur and lizards with big, like, parrot beaks that snap off fingers and things like that. Just kind of creepiness that maybe kids, boys would like.
Great. Yeah, because it's definitely, an underrepresented. So that's, a great market to get into. So again, if you all are just joining us, we are here talking with Don Stansberry through the Headline Books Zoom Into Books program. He's been with Headline Books for several books of his, including novels, middle grade, and children's books. So going back to your work in the school system, I know that you have a collaboration book that you actually wrote with a classroom. So wrote with a school. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a great book. They had an idea to do a ABC book for their state's history, which was Virginia, and that encompasses a lot of history. I mean, it was really rich with ideas. So they broke the book down so certain grade levels would take certain parts to look at. Every kid in the whole school, and I think there was 600 some kids, 400 some kids, had had a picture in the book. It might have been for kindergarten kids, they drew maybe pictures of leaves that were the borders of pages, but there were really some good artists in that school, and they had larger pictures. So the nightmare part of it was putting it all together with the pictures, scanning the pictures in. Of course, I had nothing to do with that. That was all done by the headline staff and their patience and cooperation. But it turned out to be a really nice book. The inside cover and the back cover are all autographed. It was a really good fundraiser. It raised their testing scores in social studies, in reading, and in social studies, I guess double digits.
Wow.
So it worked out well with that, and I think they made some money from it too. I mean, when you have a school that's raising money, plus they know that their kid has a picture in the book, they're going to buy it. So it was a ready-made thing, and it worked out well. And I got to spend maybe a week down there with the school all together, and it was a great time. It was a project that I'd love to do again.
Yeah, that was my next question. Do you have any projects that you're currently working on with any other schools, or is that something that you like to do in the future? Obviously, yes.
I would like to do it in the future. I mean, we've talked to people at various conferences, and everybody, it's one of those things. It's such a good idea that everybody's excited about it, and then when they get back to their school, I think sometimes they'll have people around and say, "Well, we could," there's all the naysayers.
Mm-hmm.
So. We've had a lot of interest, but not anything yet in terms of what, anything permanent, concrete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, if you all are just joining us, we are chatting with Don Stansberry today on the Headline Books Zoom Into Books program. And Don, we were chatting a little bit before this, and that you had selected a passage from Inky. Would you like to read that?
Yeah, I got one from each.
Perfect.
This is kind of... this is just the very beginning. So you kind of get a feel for the book. You kind of get a feel for the person. Like I say, he lives a solitary life. Well, let me just start it.
Okay.
Wrong page here. The wood in the fireplace crackled and popped as tiny sparks flitted through the air. With a loud snap, a glowing ember launched its way out of the fire and bounced across the earthen floor, coming to rest at the foot of a newt. The lizard looked down and sniffed as the orange glow died out, then continued its meal of a large legless grasshopper. One of the legs of the grasshopper roasted over the fire. Purple sauce covered the other leg and dripped down a gleaming beard. Inkydomus put down the grasshopper leg and gently wiped his mouth with a coarse brown napkin. He was very conscious of the purple sauce running down his white beard. His hair shined with the same silvery color, but his eyes shone a dark, dark black. The color of the darkest ink, his mother said when she named him. He took a sip of berry squeezings and sat his tiny bronze goblet on the tiny wooden table. Everything in the small room was exactly the right size to fit a person dining at the table. He was only 12 inches tall. And the fire cast an amber glow in the room. The roasting grasshopper leg gave off a tasty aroma. A dozen homemade candles burned in groups on shelves and tables. The newt and the man, who were about the same size, had settled into a comfortable silence in the cozy room. So that's where he's in hiding. He has a lot of different things. He has this flute that's made from a tree that was struck by lightning. So this flute, when he blows it, brings this hawk to him. And he rides on the back of this hawk wherever he wants to go. He lives in the foundations of an old, destructed castle. It's just the ruins, but he lives, so he can get out, come back and forth. He also has when he sticks the flute into the lake and plays it there, he calls a big catfish. And he has a special suit that he goes on and goes under the water with catfish. So he get into all kinds of things.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is very imaginative and there's a lot of elements. So while you're writing these, do you outline, or how do you organize your thoughts so that you keep everything straight? Because there are a lot of elements, it sounds like.
I have a book of big thoughts, just this is going to happen, then this and this and this, maybe 10 points for the whole book. Then in each part of that broken down, I go more like a daily schedule of what needs to happen next. Because, some of these, if you take a week off between it, you kind of know what you thought about and but you don't know if you've written it down yet or not. So that way I can kind of mark it off. Same way with the novels too. It gets really complicated in some of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so speaking of your novels, I know that you've had a book release in New York before, and you've attended Book Expo America. So, you know, writing can take you all sorts of places. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, some of the places I guess I've been to, I didn't even remember. But
I know.
and it's just, well, with headline books, I've been to every place. I've been to Washington, D.C. We were talking about going to Chicago, which is a city I've never been to. But we did a release in New York, and been to Charlotte. Up and down the East Coast, and that was the ones I've gone to. There are many others that I could have gone to, Las Vegas and Atlanta, and a lot of places where I had the ability to go, but because of school, I couldn't take off time or one thing or another. But that's the great thing about headline books. There's always an opportunity to go someplace and sell your books. Mm-hmm. And, that's where you really get to meet people and enjoy people. Not only the other authors, but just people coming in and talk to them. Because, for me, I live in this one little bubble here in West Virginia. And, I see things from that point of view. I don't ever always see things from other people's point of view. So it's interesting in seeing what other people are interested in.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you do a lot of signings around West Virginia as well, at Tamarack. That's one of your hot spots. And for anybody who doesn't know, Tamarack is an amazing place in Beckley, West Virginia. And it's it's like one of the artisan capitals of West Virginia. There's a restaurant in there, and there's books and art and sculptures, and it's there's glass flowing. There's everything there. Do you want to talk a little bit about signing there?
Yeah, it's just a great place. The people that work there are very nice. The crafts and artifacts that are there are just unbelievable. I mean, I don't think you find those anyplace else in the world. Mm-hmm. If you like the kind of things that they make here in West Virginia. You can even take. Well, I was down there once, and one of the workers said, "You got to come and watch this. Got to look at this." So you can have your own glass blowing class. So there was a guy and a girl in there, and they made their own Christmas ornaments. But she was going, "Now watch." And before, and there was a group of people watching him, and all of a sudden he got down on one knee and proposed. So they had made their ornaments the day he proposed to her. So, I'm a real sap for that kind of thing. So we were all standing around, and I thought, we ought to do something. So I just started applauding, and then everybody applauded, and they looked at the windows. It was just a great thing. So that kind of thing happens at Tamarack. They're just nice people. And, again, it's a great place where it seems like people from the north go through Tamarack to get to the south, and people from the east go through there. It's just a place where a lot of different places go. So for me, it's great because the books are going all over the country from there.
Oh, yeah. It's, definitely like a, spot that you stop at, along traveling to somewhere else. But it's one of those places that it's so unique that you can't not stop when you see it from the, it just looks unique from the outside as well.
And I've done some signings down at the Travel Plaza too, and I talked with people there, and it's amazing how many people stop at the Travel Plaza but never walk through Tamarack. Mm-hmm. And I always try to build it up and say, man, you got to stop there. That's a place where there's things in there you'll see that you'll never ever see anyplace else.
Oh, it's so true. There's so much talent in in the arts mm-hmm. there specifically. Oh, it's beautiful stuff. So again, if you are just joining us, we are chatting with Don Stansberry today on Zoom Into Books. He is one of the amazing award-winning Headline Books authors. So speaking of awards, Don, you have won several book awards for several of your books. Can you chat a little bit about that?
Well, again, that's all done through Kathy, my publisher, and Headline Books. They entered the books in a lot of competitions, and it's great for us because it's good publicity and it makes you feel good. So I think every book has won something. And again, you'd have to go to the website to see what they have won. But Secret Blood won several awards. I know even this book, the second Inky book, it won an award for the cover, which I had nothing to do with. It's all Kathy. But it was that was one of the top covers of that year. But there's all kinds of things to enter all kinds of contests to enter the books in. And you know, it's a real ego builder when you're struggling to get something on the page, and you know, well, you can look back and say, well, you know, I did okay on this. Maybe I can work a little bit harder and get something on this too.
Right, right. It's definitely a process. And, you know, it's always nice to have motivation like that to make you know that, like, okay, like you've achieved this, and then that kind of serves as motivation when you're stuck on your next one. So it's, you know, all part of the process for sure.
It is, and it opens doors too, because when Secret Blood also won the London Book Awards, and you know, and I thought, geez, that's kind of a big deal. So there was an article in the paper about it, and after that, I got calls from, you know, I spoke at the Rotary Club, spoke at the Women's Club. You know, you go to those places and they see your face, they get used to you, and then they'll buy that book, and maybe they'll buy the next one too if they like it. So you know, it's trying to create a brand, not necessarily of characters or books, but a brand of yourself.
Right. And so speaking of branding yourself, you know, I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that you do write across multiple genres. And, you know, not every author does that. You know, some authors write specifically romance. Some people stick to children's books. So can you chat a little bit about writing across those genres?
Yeah, I want to break into the romance.
Do it, Don. Do it.
No, I saw Nicholas Sparks speak one time, and he filled half the Civic Center. It was unbelievable. I thought, man, if I could even do a tenth of what he did, I would be just happy with that.
It takes the right mentality and the right person to write it. So
it's the right touch. But you know, the ideas that I get, and I get a lot of them while I sleep. You know, that little bit of time where you're awake in the morning, but you're not quite up yet, but you're just awake, figuring things out. I get a lot of ideas then, and they don't all necessarily or target, you know, mainstream novels or children's books, or, you know, just a little idea. And then you think, well, that could turn into this, or it could turn into that. And I started keeping a little tablet by my desk, because, you know, you forget so many of that stuff if you get up and go through a day and you come back and you thought, well, what was I thinking about? And so for me, it frees you up to have ideas, because it might be a kid's idea, or it might be a picture book idea, or it might be a mainstream novel idea. I'm really working hard on, not as hard as I should be probably, but on short stories right now, because I've got several that, there's a couple finished and a couple I'm working on, and I think it's a whole different genre. I mean, all you really do on short stories is put an idea out there, and you don't have to follow through on it. It's just kind of a bang, and I like that. I'm going to try to do that.
Yeah, it's a great brainstorming exercise too, you know, just like stream of consciousness, you know, just give yourself a prompt and then just write what comes to your mind, because you can really pick out, you know, some good ideas when you just are free to just think.
Yeah, and it's good to know that you can finish something in, you know, a short story in a couple of weeks, rather than, you know, like me, it's a year for a novel.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you see that end, that goal, that satisfaction a lot quicker.
Yeah. So are short stories the only things that you're working on right now, or are there any other like children's books or novels?
I do. I have something that's just about ready to present to my publisher, and hopefully by this time, when I do the Zoom on books next week, I can get her a couple pictures.
Ooh, so it's a children's book then?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
It's a book where I've done the story and the pictures. And I have a friend of mine, a really talented guy, who's first time trying to do some of the color background.
Oh, nice.
So it's really, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you just joining us, we are chatting with Don Stansberry, Headline Books author here on Zoom Into Books, who is an author and also an illustrator. So a lot of people do one or the other. They write or they illustrate, but you do both. So we are going to be chatting specifically about your picture books next week, but just give us a little preview. What's it like to do both?
I don't, it's very hard for me to imagine doing them separately.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's just, if you get the story, for me, I just feel like I'd have to do the pictures too. I mean, it's just hard to give that up, you know, and I've been working on one for almost 4 or 5, 6 years, and I just can't get it right in my head. I'm okay with the animal parts, but not the little girl in it. So I'm really working on, do it for a while, then I stop, and the pictures are what's killing me on that. But
Yeah.
it's just fun. I mean, I've always thought that I could, if I saw something, I could draw it. But to draw something of my own, that was a huge challenge. I mean, when you try to think, I try to talk myself into it and say, well, it's just lines on a page is all it is. But to put more into it, to show the emotions and the happiness or what that person's feeling in the picture, it's a little bit different.
Oh, it certainly is. It's definitely a learned skill that takes a lot of practice to master, because the illustrations carry so much weight of the story. So, they've got to propel it just like the words have to propel it.
Well, you should. I mean, you're the big time illustrator now. I mean, if people don't know that, she really, really is, and she's on her way to being one of the big ones. So you really are, and you deserve it. But
Well, thank
you know that you're taking somebody else's word sometimes and trying to fulfill what they want done. But you also got to have your own creative juices flowing for it and stand up for yourself in that. And you've done really well with that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is. I mean, and it's so, I would imagine amazing to illustrate your own words, just because as you're writing it, I'm sure that you get, ideas for how the picture would carry a certain aspect of the story. So it's great to be able to do both.
Yeah, it's hard to know what part of the story needs illustrated and what to let go. I mean, that's a tough one too.
Yeah, it's the whole show, don't tell.
Yes.
So do you have a passage that you'd like to read from your second book in your middle grade series?
Sure. Now this one is Inky, Ogilvy, and the Witches. I'm holding it up. Just like a ShamWow. So anyhow, Ogilvy gets to be his little friend. He's not quite human, but he's not quite a dwarf. He's kind of somewhere in between. He's very loyal to Inky, but he's not real bright, but he's ready to fight at any drop of a hat. So that's what the story gets into. At one point, part of the reason that the Royal Zoo has such strange animals is because of this coven of witches that nobody knows about. They're misfits. They don't do anything right. There's one witch that's big and ugly. They're all ugly. But one witch is big and ugly, and she puts a spell on somebody, but it backfires, and she grows fingers out of her armpits. So she's nasty enough, she scratches her armpits all the time, but now she can do it without even lifting her arms.
Oh, that's gross.
So at this one point, Ogilvy is playing with his dog, and he's talking to this dog, and he's never seen this dog before, and the dog, he says, "You want to come home with me, boy? You want to come home with me, boy?" What he doesn't realize is that was a witch that had turned herself into a dog. So here's kind of what happens after that.
Okay.
So they're woken up in the middle of the night, and out in front of their yard is a whole series of witches. Okay. So Inky sees them, and he says to Ogilvy, "It may be wise to allow me to talk to them," Inky said, running behind Ogilvy. "No, I've learned from you, I have." Ogilvy cleared his throat. "Now, what can I do for an extremely unattractive group of women like yourselves on a fine autumn night like this?" The effect was immediate. Some of the women growled, some hissed, a few reached out as if to claw his face. "Ogilvy, why did you insult them?" Inky asked. "What? She said you were being extremely kind when you called them unattractive." The line of women in front of Inky and Ogilvy separated to form a wide opening. The tallest and ugliest woman had either emerged from the darkness. Others bowed their heads as she entered the circle and walked toward the two small men. By now, most of the children were awake. One look at the group standing before them, they ran along to take their place in back of their parents. The witch's eyes were a shade darker than the puffy bags beneath them. Two misshapen ears stuck out through greasy shoulder-length hair. A huge black mole clung to the right of her mouth. She touched it with gnarled fingers from her right hand. An equally unattractive witch stepped out from behind the tall one. The short, skinny girl kept her head down. "Petite et très petite," the tall hag said. The rest of the women in the circle laughed. What'd she say? Ogilvy whispered. It's French. She called us small and very small. Ogilvy reached down for a rock lying beside his sandal. Let's see if she thinks this rock is small when I chuck it at her bony carcass. Then before Inky could stop Ogilvy hurled a stone at the bedraggled figure. Pour moi? She flicked a finger at the rock streaking towards her. The stone changed directions in midair and circled straight back at Ogilvy. He had just enough time to duck. The rock flew past and splashed into the lake. Ogilvy dusted himself off. I wish she'd stop speaking French. It's like they have a different word for everything. Well, very well. I will speak to you grubs like you may understand. She smiled, showing her yellow teeth and rotten gums. This is my daughter. She pulled the young girl close to her side and ran her hand through her greasy hair. Her heart has been broken by a liar. The others in the circle became very still. Their eyes darted from one to another. With her voice still rising, the old witch screamed, Someone has proposed marriage, but has not followed through. She yanked her daughter by the ear, pulling her in front. Now, which one of you did it? Which one of these asked you to marry him? Still looking at the ground, the unfortunate girl brought her hand up and pointed at Ogilvy. Several gasps went through the onlookers, but the loudest gasp came from Ogilvy. So you say in front of all, did you ask my daughter to wed? No, I'd never marry her, even if she were a witch and cast an evil spell on me. Ogilvy, Inky whispered, they are witches. Okay, so that's basically how they got in trouble in this book.
That's great. Thank you very much for sharing those. Those were fun.
Well,
so for any of you watching, Don's books, all of them, his novels, his middle grade, and his children's books are all available on headlinebooks.com. And hopefully as the COVID-19 pandemic hopefully plays out, hopefully we'll be able to pick back up with some book events towards the end of this year. And if not this year, then hopefully next year so that you can get back. Because I know that you miss book signings and presentations like we all do.
I do, yeah. And it's fun to just be with the other authors and with the publisher and anybody who likes books.
Oh, absolutely. So again, everybody, we've been chatting with Don Stansberry, a Headline Books author. If you missed part of the presentation today, you can certainly watch it again here on Facebook. And we do also have a YouTube channel called the Zoom Into Books. That's the title of the YouTube channel. So you can catch Don's presentation as well as the presentations from our other authors on there as well. So again, Don, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great chatting with you. And we do have another presentation scheduled for next week to talk about your children's books.
I can't wait.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.